My father was buried on a Monday. 3 days later, my wife's family invited me to dinner, and I thought they might finally say he deserved better. Instead, they put a non-disclosure agreement beside my plate. They called his evidence allegations. They erased me from the family portrait before the first course was even served. Then my brother-in-law leaned over me and said, "You don't belong in this family trash." When he slapped me, my wife did not stop him. She looked at me and whispered, "Please, don't make this worse." So I did not hit him back. I looked at the camera in the corner, reached for my phone, and made the call that turned their perfect family dinner into evidence. I used to think silence was something decent people offered to keep a family from breaking. That night, I learned silence can be rented, wrapped in legal paper, and placed beside your dinner plate. And if you accept it, you do not just lose the argument, you help them bury the truth. Before we begin, tell me where you're listening from tonight and what time it is where you are. And if you have ever been asked to stay quiet just to protect someone else's lie, stay with me. Because what that one call uncovered was worse than anything they did at that table. My brother-in-law did not slap me because he lost control. He slapped me because, in that house, control had always belonged to his family. My wife sat there while it happened. Her brother called me trash, struck me in front of everyone, and she looked at me like I was the one about to ruin dinner. But that came later. 3 days before that, I was driving through Briar Glen in a cold November rain, wearing the same dark coat I had worn to my father's funeral. The roads were slick, and every house sat far back behind stone walls and trimmed hedges. Warm lights glowed in tall windows, the kind that made everything look peaceful from the street. I had been to the Vale estate plenty of times during my marriage to Shannon, but that evening it did not feel like a home. It felt like a place built to decide who was allowed in and who was expected to know their place. In the inside pocket of my coat was my father's old notebook. Alden Voss had carried that thing everywhere near the end. The cover was soft from use, the corners bent, the pages full of names, dates, room numbers, and figures he had written by hand at his kitchen table. After he died, people kept saying he had been confused, stressed, difficult, complicated. I kept the notebook close because it was the last thing that still told the truth in his own handwriting. When I pulled into the circular drive, Shannon was waiting near the front doors. She was dressed too carefully for a quiet family dinner, not formal exactly, but polished, prepared. Her hair was pinned back, her makeup was neat, and her wedding ring flashed under the porch light when she lifted a hand. She kissed my cheek, quick and light. "Just keep it calm tonight, Cal," she said. My mother spent all afternoon setting the table. My father had been in the ground for 3 days, and Shannon was worried about the table. I wanted to ask her if her father was finally going to stop calling mine confused. I wanted to ask if she had read the emails Alden sent before he died. I wanted to ask if she believed me, even a little. Instead, I wiped rain from my collar and stepped inside. The foyer smelled like beeswax, old wood, and money. Somewhere deeper in the house, silverware touched porcelain. Shannon walked beside me, close enough to look like a wife, not close enough to feel like one. She twisted her ring once with her thumb. I knew that gesture. It meant, "Please do not make this hard for me." I told myself to watch. Listen. Let them speak before I decided what kind of night this was. Then I entered the dining room. The table was perfect. Crystal glasses, white plates, candles, polished silver. At each place setting sat a white napkin folded into the shape of a leaf. Corinne Vale had always liked things that looked gentle from a distance. My place was near the far end, not beside Shannon. Beside my plate, next to that folded white napkin, was a cream envelope with the Vale Haven Senior Living logo printed in the corner. I stopped before I sat. Shannon saw me notice it. Her eyes moved away before mine could catch them. Rexford Vale sat at the head of the table, silver-haired and calm, one hand resting near his wineglass. Corinne sat beside him, with the soft, practiced face of a woman who believed bad manners were worse than bad behavior. Marlowe leaned back in his chair, watching me with the faint amusement of a man waiting for someone else to step into a hole he had already seen. "Callahan," Rexford said. "Thank you for coming." Nobody said, "I'm sorry about your father." Nobody said Alden's name with kindness. I sat down slowly. The notebook pressed against my ribs through the lining of my coat. Rexford lifted his glass before anyone touched the food. His voice was smooth, the way it probably sounded at charity luncheons and board meetings. "Your father was a complicated man," he said. Shannon took a small breath beside me. Rexford continued, "Tonight we would like to help everyone move past the damage he caused." Damage. That was the word he chose for my father's last months alive. Not concern, not warning, not courage. Damage. My hand moved to the edge of the notebook inside my coat. I did not take it out. I only needed to feel it there. Rexford gestured toward the envelope like he was offering me dessert. "We want to avoid unnecessary pain," he said. "Public accusations won't bring Alden back. They'll only hurt employees, residents, families, and, frankly, your marriage." There it was, the soft threat wrapped in concern. I opened the envelope. Inside was a settlement agreement for $75,000 and a non-disclosure agreement. My eyes moved over the lines until one phrase stopped me cold. Financial allegations made by Alden Voss. Allegations. Not records. Not evidence. Not the names in his notebook. Allegations. Marlowe's mouth bent slightly at one corner. Corinne lowered her gaze to her plate. Shannon sat very still. Rexford folded his hands. "We are prepared to help you move forward." I looked at the clean white napkin, then at the envelope, then at the man who had turned my father's truth into paperwork. They had planned this before I ever walked in. The seating, the toast, the careful language, the money, the silence they expected me to sell. Alden's body was already buried. Now they wanted me to help bury his name. I did not touch the pen. I kept my voice even and asked, "Is this why you invited me here?" The room went quiet in a way that had nothing to do with peace. Rexford's face barely changed, but something tightened around his eyes. Shannon leaned toward me and whispered, "Cal, please, just listen first." That was when I understood what side of the table she was sitting on. I had come to that house thinking dinner might tell me whether my marriage still had a pulse. Before the first course was served, I knew the truth. The Vale family had not invited me to mourn my father. They had invited me to help erase him. Then I looked up from the envelope and saw the family portrait on the wall, and I noticed who was missing. I kept my eyes on the envelope for a moment longer than I needed to. Not because I was still reading it, I already understood what it was. $75,000, a clean legal phrase, and a promise that my father's name would never trouble the Vale family again. I looked away because if I kept staring at that paper, I might say something too early. That was when I saw the portrait. It hung above the antique sideboard on the far wall, framed in dark wood, large enough to be mistaken for history. I knew that picture. It had been taken 2 years earlier at one of the Vale Family Foundation galas, the kind with soft music, salmon on little plates, and speeches about dignity for seniors. Rexford stood in the center, one hand on Corinne's shoulder. Marlowe stood beside him, straight-backed and satisfied. Shannon was there in a pale dress, smiling the way she smiled for donors, pretty but careful. There were cousins, grandchildren, board friends, and Corinne's old spaniel sitting near the front with a ribbon around its neck. I was not in it. The dog had made the family portrait. I had not. At first, I felt no anger, just recognition. That quiet, ugly feeling when your mind finally stops protecting you from what you already knew. I remembered that gala. I had been there. I had helped Shannon find donor cards when the printed seating list went missing. I had stood near the coat check while she whispered, "Just one quick family photo. I'll be right back." Later, when the picture showed up on the foundation website, she told me not to take it personally. "It's just optics, Cal," she had said. "You know how my father is." I had let it go. Marriage teaches you to let things go, especially when the apology comes in the car on the way home and the person saying sorry is still holding your hand. Marlowe followed my gaze. He smiled without showing his teeth. "Funny thing about family portraits," he said. "They always know who belongs." Nobody at the table misunderstood him. Rexford did not correct him. Corinne gave a small, breathy laugh, the kind people use when they want ugliness to pass as manners. Shannon adjusted the stem of her wineglass and looked down. I turned toward her. I did not need a speech. I did not need her to embarrass her brother. One sentence would have been enough. "Don't talk to my husband that way. That was unfair. Stop. She said nothing. That silence did something to me. Not all at once, but steadily, like water finding a crack. I thought about all the small exclusions I had filed away as misunderstandings. Rexford introducing me at charity events as Shannon's husband and nothing more. Corinne asking me to step aside for just blood relatives during Thanksgiving pictures, then patting my arm like I should be grateful she had said it gently. Marlowe joking that I worked with spreadsheets, as if forensic accounting was something a man did because he could not manage real power. And Shannon, always later. Sorry about Marlowe. Don't mind Mom. Dad didn't mean it that way. Later was where my marriage kept all its honesty. Never in the room where it cost her something. Marlowe reached toward the cream envelope. He slid it a few inches closer to me, with 2 fingers, like a man pushing a check across a country club table. Men like you don't get offered a clean exit twice, he said. There it was again. That easy voice. Not loud, not angry, worse than angry. Certain. Corinne's mouth tightened. Marlowe, let's not make this unpleasant. But she did not say he was wrong. She only objected to the lack of polish. Rexford sat still at the head of the table, letting his son do the work he did not want on his own hands. That was how the Vale family operated. Rexford controlled the room. Marlowe enforced the boundaries. Corinne smoothed the edges. Shannon survived by pretending the damage was not happening while everyone watched. And me? I was supposed to absorb it. I felt the old instruction rise in my chest. Be calm. Be reasonable. Don't make a scene. Be the bigger man. But sitting there with my father's name reduced to financial allegations, that phrase started sounding different. Sometimes, be the bigger man just means make yourself easier to step over. Shannon's hand moved beneath the table and settled on my wrist. From across the room, it might have looked tender. A wife steadying her husband. But I knew the pressure of her fingers. It was not comfort. It was warning. Her eyes flicked toward me, then toward her father. Not here. Don't embarrass me. Let this pass. For 1 second, I let her hand stay there. Some part of me still wanted to believe she was scared, not choosing. There is a difference, and when you love someone, you will spend a long time trying to find it. Then I slowly moved my wrist away. Not sharply, not for show, just enough. Her hand remained on the table, empty. Rexford began speaking again about peace, dignity, and protecting the residents who depended on Vale Haven. He had a gift for making his own protection sound like public service, but I barely heard him. My eyes returned to the portrait. I used to think being left out of that picture was an oversight. Sitting there, with Marlowe smiling like he owned the air in the room, and Shannon pretending silence was kindness, I finally understood. They had not forgotten me. They had placed me exactly where they thought I belonged, outside the frame. I was still looking at the portrait when Shannon touched my wrist under the table again. And that was when I realized she was not trying to comfort me. Shannon's fingers pressed once against my wrist, light enough that nobody else would notice, firm enough that I knew exactly what she meant. Not here. Not now. Let my father finish. I looked at her, but she kept her eyes on the wine glass in front of her. The candlelight caught the edge of her ring, and for 1 tired second, I remembered Alden holding her hand at our wedding reception, telling her she was family now. He had meant it. My father was not a man who said things for decoration. That memory made her silence harder to forgive. Rexford continued as if Marlowe had not just told me I did not belong in the family picture. Alden's final months were difficult, he said. Stress does that to a man. Age does that too. He started seeing patterns where there were only administrative issues. Administrative issues. My father had written room numbers, resident names, dates, and missing care reports in a notebook he kept beside his coffee mug. Rexford made it sound like Alden had misplaced his reading glasses. Marlowe gave a small laugh from across the table. He should have taken the pension and enjoyed retirement. Some people don't know when to leave well enough alone. I waited for Shannon. She did not look at her brother. She did not say my father had worked his whole life without stealing a dollar. She did not say Alden deserved respect 3 days after his funeral. She only kept her hand near mine, ready to stop me if I became inconvenient. That was the thing about Shannon. She had never needed to raise her voice to shut me down. She did it with small signals. A look toward the floor, a breath through her nose, a touch under the table. Later, She would say she was trying to keep peace. But peace, in that family, always seemed to mean I was the one who had to swallow the insult. I thought about the night my car died outside Monroeville during our first winter as a married couple. Shannon had called my father because I was stuck at work. Alden drove 40 minutes in sleet, helped her wait for the tow truck, then brought her home and made grilled cheese because she was shaking from the cold. For months after that, he called her kiddo. She used to smile when he did. Now she sat beside me while her father reduced him to a confused old man. Rexford nodded toward the envelope. "This agreement is not an admission by anyone," he said. "It is a way to protect people from unnecessary harm. Vale Haven employs hundreds of good people. Families depend on us. Residents depend on us. Reckless accusations can hurt more than the intended target." He was good. I will give him that. He could make self-protection sound like public service. He could talk about vulnerable seniors while using them as a shield. He could sit beneath a portrait that excluded me and speak as if I was the one threatening family. I looked down at the settlement, $75,000. Enough to sound generous if you did not know what it was buying. Too little to resemble justice if you understood what they wanted buried. My eyes returned to the same phrase. Financial allegations made by Alden Voss. Not findings, not records, not evidence. Allegations. The wording was not accidental. I knew documents. I had spent half my adult life reading what people tried to hide inside polite language. That phrase was built to shrink my father into a nuisance. Rexford folded his hands. "We are prepared to help you move forward." Marlowe added, "That's more than fair, considering the trouble he caused." Corinne spoke softly, as if softness could make the sentence kind. It would let everyone breathe again. Then Shannon leaned close enough that her perfume mixed with the candle smoke. "Maybe signing it doesn't mean your dad was wrong," she whispered. "Maybe it just means we can survive this." There it was. She had made betrayal sound like marriage. I looked at her then. Really looked. This was not a woman asking me to heal. This was a woman asking me to know less, so she could keep the life she preferred. Beside the agreement lay a black pen. Heavy, expensive, the kind of pen powerful men place beside signature lines, because even the act of surrender is supposed to feel important. I thought of Alden's kitchen table, the chipped mug, the stack of pharmacy receipts, the cheap ballpoint pen he used until the ink faded. He had written down names because names mattered to him. Not accounts, not billing categories, people. Rexford's pen was there to end the truth. My father's pen had tried to save it. I did not stand. I did not raise my voice. I did not insult anyone at that table. I simply placed 2 fingers on the black pen and slid it away from the agreement. It rolled once across the polished wood and stopped near Marlowe's plate. The small sound changed the room. Marlowe's face tightened, like I had done something personally offensive. Rexford's expression stayed composed, but the warmth left his eyes. Corinne reached for her water glass and missed it the first time. Shannon whispered, "Cal." Not proudly, not with relief, with warning. I kept my hand flat on the table. "I'm going to say this once," I said. "Do not ask me to sign away my father's name." The silence after that was heavier than any shouting could have been. Rexford studied me for a long moment. "Are you refusing the offer?" I looked at Shannon one last time. I wanted her to say Alden's name. Not your dad. Not this situation. Not the past. Just his name, spoken like he had mattered. Instead, she said, "Please don't turn this into a war." That was when I understood the trap completely. If I signed, my marriage might stay standing, at least from the outside. The Vale family would call me reasonable. People in Briar Glen would say grief had made things messy, but everyone had chosen dignity. And my father would become a rumor they paid to silence. If I refused, Shannon might choose them. Rexford could bring lawyers. Marlowe could push harder. They could tell everyone I was unstable, bitter, unable to let go. There was no painless door out of that room, so I chose the one that did not require me to betray a dead man. "I didn't bring a war to this table," I said. Marlowe leaned forward. Rexford's polite mask tightened. Shannon pulled her hand back into her lap. All I had done was move a pen away from a lie. But from the way Marlowe pushed his chair back, you would have thought I had put a match to the family fortune. The legs of Marlowe's chair dragged across the polished floor with a slow, ugly scrape. No one told him to sit back down. That was the part I noticed. Not his size, not his temper. The permission. Rexford kept his attention on me, not his son. Corinne's hand tightened around her water glass. Shannon lowered her eyes to her lap as if the answer might be folded there. I stayed seated. The agreement was still open in front of me. The black pen sat near Marlowe's plate where I had pushed it. My white napkin rested across my knees, still folded neatly at one corner, like the table itself was trying to pretend nothing had changed. Marlowe came around the table. He did not move like a man who had snapped. He moved like a man who had been waiting for the room to give him permission, and now that it had, he intended to enjoy it. I could feel my pulse in my jaw. "Stand up," some part of me said. "Don't," the smarter part answered, because I knew what they needed from me. Rexford needed me loud. Marlowe needed me angry. Shannon needed me quiet. If I lost control, every lie they wanted to tell about me would have a picture to stand on. Marlowe stopped beside my chair. He leaned down just enough that I could smell the wine on his breath and the expensive soap on his cuff. His voice stayed low, but the whole table heard him. "You don't belong in this family, Trash." The words did not surprise me as much as they should have. That was the strange thing. Some insults arrive like a blow. Others simply give a name to what has been happening for years. The portrait had said it. The seating had said it. The envelope had said it. Marlowe was just the first person in that room willing to stop decorating the message. I thought of all the nights I had worn the right jacket, kept my voice pleasant, laughed at jokes that had teeth in them, and accepted Shannon's apologies in private because I wanted to believe private regret could balance public disrespect. It cannot. Marlowe's hand moved before anyone else spoke. The slap turned my face to the side. The sound cut through the dining room, sharper than a dropped glass. My ear rang. Heat spread across my cheek. For a second, the candles, the silverware, the portrait on the wall, all of it blurred at the edges. The white napkin slid from my lap and fell to the floor near Marlowe's shoes. It still held part of its folded shape. Even on the floor, it was trying to look proper. No one picked it up. My hands wanted to close into fists. I opened them instead and kept them flat on the table where everyone could see them. That one choice cost more than I expected. Pride is a loud animal when it feels cornered. But I did not stand. I did not swing. I did not give them the version of me they had already prepared. Marlowe waited, chest rising once, ready for me to make his violence look mutual. I looked past him. Corinne had one hand near her mouth, but she did not say stop. Rexford looked irritated, not horrified. That told me more about the family than any speech could have. He was not disturbed that his son had struck me. He was bothered that Marlowe had done it where it might become inconvenient. Then I looked at my wife. That was the moment I still remember more than the slap. Shannon's face had gone pale. Her fingers twisted her napkin under the edge of the table. I waited for her to say Marlowe's name. Just his name. Marlowe. Stop. Marlowe. What are you doing? Marlowe. He is my husband. Instead, she looked at me and whispered, Cal, please don't make this worse. Something inside me went still. Not dead. Not broken. Still. Because she had spoken to the man who had been hit, not the man who had hit him. She had treated my reaction as the danger. In her mind, the injury was not the slap. The injury would be me refusing to swallow it neatly enough for dinner to continue. Marlowe gave a short laugh. That's what I thought. Rexford finally spoke. Everyone needs to calm down. Everyone. That word almost made me smile. The man standing over me was not told to leave. The son who had hit me was not called out. The wife who watched it happen was not asked what kind of marriage she thought she was protecting. Everyone needed to calm down. I touched my cheek once, lightly, then lowered my hand. Above the far corner of the room, near the crown molding, I saw the small black dome of the estate security camera. I had noticed it on previous visits, the way I noticed exits, documents, systems, and weak points. That was what my work had trained me to do. Look at what people assume no one else is watching. If I hit him back, they would own the story by morning. If I stayed still, the record might own it first. The napkin lay near Marlowe's polished shoes. The NDA sat open beside my plate. Shannon's hand was back in her lap. Rexford's house was quiet enough that I could hear the rain touch the windows. I had walked into that room wondering whether my marriage still had a pulse. Now I knew. It had not died when Marlowe's hand struck my face. It died when Shannon asked me to protect the room from the consequences. So I looked toward the camera in the corner, reached for my phone, and made the call they never believed I was prepared to make. I kept my phone in my right hand, but I did not unlock it yet. Not immediately. I let the room sit with what had happened. Marlowe was still beside my chair, waiting for anger to make me useful to him. Rexford watched me with that careful, guarded expression men get when they realize a mistake has been made, but not yet by them. Corinne's hand hovered near her throat. Shannon looked as if every sound in the room had become too sharp for her. The white napkin stayed on the floor. My cheek burned, but I kept both hands visible for one more breath. I wanted the camera to see exactly what the room had seen. Me seated, him standing. The agreement open, the pen away from the signature line. Then I looked toward the corner of the ceiling and said, clear enough for everyone to hear. Make sure that footage stays exactly where it is. Marlowe let out a short laugh. You think anyone here is going to help you? I did not answer him. He still thought help meant permission from his family. I unlocked my phone. That was when Shannon finally moved toward me. Not enough to touch me, just enough to whisper, Cal, don't. Wrong words. Not, are you hurt? Not, Marlowe, back up. Not, Dad, stop this. Cal, don't. She was still afraid of exposure, not harm. I tapped the number I had saved under Pike. Agent Orson Pike was not a friend. He was not a magic button. He was a federal healthcare fraud investigator who had been listening for weeks while Merritt Sloan helped me sort my father's notes into something a government office could actually use. When he answered, I kept my voice low. Pike. It happened. NDA on the table. Assault on camera. Witnesses present. Tell Merritt to move the packet and preserve the footage before Vail's security vendor gets a friendly call. The line went quiet for half a second. Then Pike said, stay seated. Do not engage. I'm initiating preservation through counsel. That was all I needed. I ended the call. Rexford's expression changed, not fear. Men like him rarely start there. Irritation came first. Offense. The look of a man whose house had been disobeyed. Who was that? He asked. I slipped the phone back into my hand but did not pocket it. Marlowe scoffed. You think a phone call scares this family? I looked at him. Not yet, I thought. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Real power does not usually collapse all at once. It checks its watch. It makes one more polite threat. It assumes the room still belongs to it. Rexford stood. Callahan, you are making a very serious mistake. I'm sitting at your table with a red mark on my face, I said. Let's not pretend I started the mistakes. His jaw tightened. You are grieving, he said. You are angry. I understand that. But if you try to turn a private family matter into something public, you will regret it. There it was again. Concern, wearing a threat's coat. It stopped being private, I said, when you put an NDA beside my plate. Marlowe stepped closer, but Rexford lifted one hand without looking at him. That told me the room had shifted. 5 minutes earlier, Marlowe had been useful. Now he was a liability with polished shoes. Shannon said, please, Cal, we can still talk. I turned to her. You had all night to talk. She looked down as if the floor had finally become easier than my face. Then Rexford's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and silenced it. It rang again. This time I saw the name before he tilted the screen away. Thayer Bexley, General Counsel. Across the table, Corinne's phone lit up. Her hand trembled as she read the message. I caught only 2 words reflected in her glasses. Board notice. Marlowe's phone buzzed next. He pulled it out with the same irritation he had shown toward me. Then his face lost its smugness. Whatever he saw, it was not praise. Shannon's phone glowed beside her plate. She reached for it slowly, read one line, and went still. That was when the room changed. Nobody asked me to sign anymore. Nobody talked about healing. Rexford answered on the 3rd ring and turned half away. But the dining room was quiet enough for pieces of the call to reach us. What complaint? A pause. Tonight? Another pause. Longer this time. No. Do not send anything to the board until I speak with Thayer. Marlowe stared at me then. Really stared. As if I had stepped out of the version of me he understood. That was his mistake. All of theirs, really. They thought grief had made me careless. It had made me precise. For weeks, I had been checking my father's notes against billing records, staffing reports, and every public filing I could pull. I had learned that timing mattered, preservation mattered. Letting powerful people create their own evidence mattered most of all. The dinner had given me three things: a non-disclosure agreement meant to silence me, witnesses who watched them pressure me, and a recorded assault after I refused to cooperate. They thought the slap put me back in my place. What it really did was move their threats out of the dining room and into the record. The white napkin was still lying by Marlowe's shoes. I looked at it once more. It was no longer just the thing that fell when he hit me. It was part of what the camera saw, part of what the room tried to ignore, part of what would now be preserved before anyone could call it a misunderstanding. Rexford ended his call slowly. For the first time since I walked into that house, he did not look like a host. He looked like a man counting exits. And when truth starts moving faster than control, men like Rexford do what they know. He reached for his phone again. This time, he called the police first. Rexford dialed with the calm of a man ordering valet service. His voice changed the moment someone answered. It softened, slowed, almost trembled at the edges. "This is Rexford Vale. We have a family disturbance at my residence. My son-in-law is grieving and unstable. We need assistance before someone gets hurt." I heard every word. That was the second strike of the night. Cleaner than Marlowe's hand, but meant to do the same thing. Put me in a role before I could speak. Shannon stepped toward him. "Dad, maybe not." Too quiet, too late. I stayed seated. The NDA remained open beside my plate. The white napkin still lay near Marlowe's shoes. My cheek burned, but I kept my hands where they could be seen. Rexford wanted the first official version to say unstable grieving son-in-law. If that phrase entered a police report before the truth did, everything after it would have to fight uphill. So I let him finish. Alden taught me that. When people lie in polished language, do not interrupt too early. Let them complete the sentence. Officer Bram Keeler arrived about 15 minutes later. By then, nobody had touched the napkin or the envelope. That mattered. The room still looked exactly like the lie Rexford had tried to tell. Rexford met him at the dining room entrance. "My son-in-law has been emotional since his father's passing," he said. "We invited him here to help. He became agitated." Marlowe added, "He refused to leave." Officer Keeler looked at the room. Marlowe standing, Rexford directing, me sitting with a red mark on my face. "Sir," he said to me, "can you tell me what happened?" "Yes," I said. "But first, you should see the footage." Rexford's eyes narrowed. I did not have to hack anything or grab control of their system. Pike and Merritt had already triggered preservation with the security vendor. The dining room camera was still available on the house console, and Officer Keeler asked the estate security service to pull the clip while he stood there. The video played on a small screen near the service hall. It showed me seated. It showed the NDA beside my plate. It showed Marlowe walking around the table. The audio caught enough. "You don't belong in this family trash." Then the slap. Then Shannon sitting still. Then me looking toward the camera. Officer Keeler watched it twice. The second time, his face gave away less, but his pen moved more. He closed his notebook, opened to a clean page, and looked at Marlowe. "I'm going to need to document this differently than it was called in," he said. "Sir, explain to me why the man sitting down was the threat." Marlowe's mouth opened, then shut. Rexford's face hardened. I did not feel happy. Not exactly. I felt relief with teeth. For once, I did not have to beg a room to believe me. The truth had a timestamp. Officer Keeler took my statement. I kept it plain. Dinner invitation. NDA. Refusal to sign. Insult. Assault. Police call framing me as unstable. I did not unload the whole fraud case on him. That was not his lane. The assault belonged in one report. The healthcare complaint belonged somewhere else. He noted the redness on my cheek. He photographed the envelope where it sat. He asked if I needed medical attention. I said no, but I wanted the incident documented and the footage preserved. Rexford said, "Officer, this is a family matter." I looked at him. Not anymore. A few minutes later, I left without Shannon. She followed me into the foyer. "Cal, wait. You don't understand what this will do." I stopped with my hand on my coat. I understand exactly what silence already did. Outside, the rain had faded into mist. I got in my car and sat there until the shaking in my hands settled enough to drive. Control costs something. Anyone who says otherwise has never had to hold still while people tried to turn him into the problem. By the time I reached my small kitchen in Pittsburgh, the house was quiet except for the old refrigerator humming. No crystal, no folded napkins, just cold coffee, a desk lamp, and Alden's notebook. I opened it differently that night. Not as a son defending his father, as a man reading names. Mrs. Inez Calder, room 214. Billed for mobility assistance after 6 p.m. No aid assigned. Hollis Denton. Daughter paid private care fee. Medicare billed anyway. Rosalie Denton called twice. No response logged. I stopped at the underlined sentence near the bottom of the page. They're billing for care they never gave. Fraud sounds clean when lawyers say it. It feels different with an 84-year-old woman's room number beside it. That night, I understood this was no longer just about my father's name or my marriage. Once I saw those names, quitting stopped looking like peace. It started looking like permission. By morning, I thought I understood the worst thing the Vale family had done, but then a woman named Verity Caro sent me a message that changed everything. I slept less than 3 hours. When I woke, the apartment was gray with early light, and my phone looked like it had been trying to catch fire all night. Missed calls from Shannon, 2 from Rowan, 1 text from Sabine that said, "Tell me you're somewhere safe." There were unknown numbers too. One message sat near the top, short enough to fit on the screen. Your father wasn't confused. He was early. The name above it was Verity Caro. I knew that name. Alden had written it twice in his notebook. Once beside Director of Nursing, once beside Refused to Sign. I read the message again, then a third time. I had told myself I believed my father. Of course I did. But belief under pressure is not as simple as people think. When powerful people repeat that a dead man was confused, unstable, difficult, the doubt does not have to win. It only has to whisper while you are tired. Verity's message quieted that whisper. By 9:30, I was in a diner outside Pittsburgh, sitting across from a woman with silver hair, tired eyes, and a blue binder held close to her chest. Verity did not waste time. "They pushed me out 6 months ago," she said. "Officially, I failed to maintain team culture." She gave a dry smile. "That means I would not sign reports I knew were false." She opened the binder between us. Inside were staffing schedules, handwritten corrections, copies of overnight logs, and notes from nurses who had been too scared to attach their full names. "Alden came to me with questions," she said. "At first, I thought he was another office man counting pennies. Then I realized he was matching billed care to actual care." She tapped one page. Residents charged for help that never came. Night staffing reports changed after supervisors signed off. Families paying private fees while another claim went out through the system. I stared at the pages, but what I saw was my father at his kitchen table, glasses low on his nose, refusing to let a column of figures stay faceless. Verity's voice softened. "Your father was the only man in that building who looked at those residents like people, not billing codes." Something in me shifted. Not healed, not eased, shifted. Alden had not been chasing ghosts. He had been early, and he had been nearly alone. After Verity left, I sat in my car with her binder on the passenger seat and the notebook open in my lap. The evidence was stronger now, but so was the cost. I thought about Shannon, the house we shared, the wedding photo in the hallway, lawyers, hearings, relatives choosing sides, headlines that would make strangers talk like they knew my father better than I did. For a few minutes, I understood why people stay quiet. Not because they cannot tell right from wrong, because truth can make your life unlivable before it makes anything better. I drove to the house Shannon and I had shared because I needed clothes, a charger, and a folder of scanned documents. I did not go there looking for a fight. I was too tired for one. The place felt wrong the moment I stepped inside. Same mugs near the sink, same throw blanket on the couch, Same framed picture from our anniversary trip, but everything looked borrowed now. In Shannon's desk, behind foundation invitations and old donor lists, I found an envelope. My father's handwriting was on the front. For my son. If I'm wrong, burn it. If I'm not, don't let them bury this with me. The seal had already been opened. I stood there with the envelope in my hand when Shannon came in from the hallway. She stopped as if the floor had dropped. "Cal," she said. I looked inside. Transfer notes. A small USB drive. One handwritten page from Alden explaining where to look next. I asked, "When did you get this?" Her eyes filled slowly. "Before he died." "Why didn't you give it to me?" She pressed her hand to her mouth, then lowered it. "I thought if you never saw it, we could still have a life." That answer did more damage than any lie would have. "You didn't save our life," I said. "You helped them bury his." She cried then, quietly, but I had nothing left to do with her tears. Fear may explain a choice. It does not erase what the choice destroyed. I left with the envelope, the USB drive, and the last clean piece of trust between us gone. From there, I drove straight to Merritt Sloan's office in Pittsburgh. Merritt was already waiting. The slap had not started the case. That was what the Vale family did not understand. For 6 weeks, I had scanned my father's notebook, compared billing dates, checked public filings, and brought every clean copy I had to Merritt. She had spoken with Agent Pike. They had built the complaint carefully, because powerful people survive sloppy anger. The packet was already drafted. Alden's ledger, staffing discrepancies, possible Medicare and Medicaid overbilling, foundation transfers, a witness list. What we lacked was a clear act of pressure tied to my refusal to stay silent. The dinner gave us that. The NDA, the insult, the slap, Rexford's police call, the preserved footage. Merritt read the label on my father's envelope and looked at me over her glasses. "They didn't just threaten you, Cal," she said. "They documented their own pressure campaign." Agent Pike joined by phone. His voice was steady. "Now we preserve everything," he said, "and we let them lie where it can be recorded." I looked at the binder, the notebook, the envelope, and the USB drive spread across Merritt's conference table. I could have called Petra Lorne, the reporter, that afternoon. I could have posted the footage. I could have made Marlowe famous before dinner. But rage moves fast, and evidence has to last. So I chose the hearing, not because I trusted the system blindly. I did not. But because Rexford Vale had spent his life controlling private rooms, I wanted him in a public one. By the time I left Merritt's office, I no longer wanted the Vale family to tell me the truth. I wanted them close enough to their own lies that they could not step away when the record started moving. At the hearing, Rexford Vale walked in wearing the calm face of a man who still believed he could turn my father into the criminal. The hearing room had none of the Vale family's polish. No candles, no silver-rimmed plates, no folded napkins pretending the table was clean. Just fluorescent lights, microphones, state officials, plastic water pitchers, and people taking notes because, in that room, words could not float away after dinner. I sat beside Merritt Sloan with my father's notebook in front of me. It looked small on that table. Worn cover, bent corners, pages softened by his hands. Around it were printed exhibits, legal folders, and binders thick enough to make the truth look official. But I knew better. The most honest thing in that room was the little notebook everybody else would have thrown in a drawer. Rexford entered like he still believed the room belonged to him. Dark suit, calm face, silver hair combed back. Marlowe sat behind him, jaw tight, not smiling anymore. Corinne sat beside Shannon with a tissue folded in both hands. Shannon did not sit with me. That told me enough. Rexford looked my way once, then looked past me like I was an unpleasant errand. I was nervous. I will not pretend otherwise. Men like Rexford do not need to shout to make a lie sound expensive. But this was not his dining room. The microphones were on. The record was running. Rexford spoke first. He talked about decades of service, community trust, families relying on Vale Haven, church partnerships, jobs, charity drives, all the things men list when they want reputation to walk into the room before evidence does. Then his voice softened. "My family has been targeted by grief, resentment, and false accusations," he said. We chose not to speak ill of Mr. Alden Voss after his passing. His son has not shown us the same restraint. My hand tightened under the table. Merritt touched the edge of my folder, not my wrist, not the way Shannon had done it to silence me. Merritt's touch meant, hold steady. Then Rexford's attorney submitted the memo, North Sable Consulting. An internal approval tied to suspicious payments. Electronic signature, Alden Voss. Approval time, April 12, 2:17 p.m. For a moment, the room tilted. That was the fear I had carried since the funeral. Not that my father was gone. I already knew that. The fear was that men with better suits would leave him buried under their version of him. Rexford lowered his voice. We did not want to dishonor a grieving family by releasing this, he said. But Mr. Voss has forced us to correct the record. Merritt had planned to begin with the ledger, then Verity's staffing records, then the transfers. Rexford had changed the room. So I leaned toward Merritt and said, start with April 12. She looked at me once. Then she stood. We asked to enter 3 connected exhibits, she said. The North Sable memo, the Allegheny General Visitor Log, and a nurse's note from the ICU. A photograph came up on the screen. My father in a hospital bed, eyes closed, a monitor behind him. The wall clock read 2:16 p.m. The visitor log showed I was there from 1:42 to 4:05. The nurse's note stated Alden Voss was sedated and non-responsive during that window. The room went still. I spoke only once. My father could not approve a vendor from an ICU bed while sedated. Then I added, this is not grief talking. These are timestamps. That was the first visible crack in Rexford Vale's face. His attorney tried to recover. Clerical issue, system delay, administrative confusion, the usual fog people throw over simple facts. Merritt called Verity Caro. Verity walked forward with her blue binder held tight against her ribs. Her hands shook once when she sat down, then steadied. She gave her name, her age, and her former position at Vale Haven. Rexford's attorney tried to call her disgruntled. Verity did not flinch. They took my job, she said. I kept the schedules. She opened the binder. Staffing logs, payroll reports, corrected night records, notes from nurses told to change entries after shifts had already ended. Merritt asked, was this one clerical error? No, Verity said. It was a pattern. Then she looked toward me. Alden Voss was the only man in that building who looked at those residents like people, not billing codes. For the first time, my father was not being defended only by his son. The truth had witnesses. Rexford's attorney tried to separate the dinner from the fraud. He called it an unfortunate family incident. Merritt played the footage. The dining room appeared on the hearing screen, the envelope, the table, Marlowe walking toward me, his words, the slap, Shannon sitting still, me looking toward the camera. Merritt paused the video. Not on Marlowe's face, not on mine, on the white napkin lying beside his polished shoes. The thing they left on the floor became the thing nobody in that room could look away from. This incident occurred after Mr. Voss refused to sign a non-disclosure agreement regarding the allegations before this board, Merritt said. Then Officer Keeler's statement was entered. It confirmed Rexford had called me unstable, that the footage contradicted that report, and that the assault was documented. The room was no longer hearing about a family argument. It was watching pressure become evidence. Finally, Merritt looked at me. I nodded. She played the recording from the USB drive my father had left in the envelope Shannon hid. Alden's voice filled the room, weak but clear. If this reaches my son, it means they tried to make me the thief. I wasn't. Follow the transfers to the foundation. They are billing for care they never gave. Cal, don't shout for me. Just finish the work. I closed my eyes. For weeks, I had carried his voice inside memory. Now it was outside me. In the room, in the record, somewhere Rexford could not smooth it over with a toast. When the recording ended, nobody spoke. Not Rexford, not Marlowe, not Shannon. The silence felt nothing like the silence at dinner. That one had protected them. This one exposed them. The board chair called for a recess. Reporters moved quickly. Officials gathered around folders. Agent Pike stepped into the hallway with his phone already in his hand. Rexford stayed seated a moment too long, as if standing would make the truth official. Shannon turned toward me. Her face said she wanted to explain. I looked away. Not because I hated her, because I no longer needed her to tell me whether I had been right. My father already had. The Vale family had spent years sitting at one table, but after that hearing, they all started looking for separate doors. The first thing to disappear was the portrait. By Monday morning, the Vale Family Foundation had taken it off the homepage. That same gala photo I had stared at over dinner, the one with Rexford in the center and even Corinne's old spaniel included, was gone like it had never mattered. For years, that picture had proved I did not belong. Now, it could not protect the people who did. Petra Lorne's article went live before lunch. She did not write it like a scandal sheet. She did not have to. Vale Haven faced licensing scrutiny. Federal healthcare fraud investigators were reviewing records. A former nursing director had supplied staffing documents. A whistleblower complaint tied billing concerns to foundation transfers. Video from a private dinner showed intimidation after a non-disclosure agreement was refused. The article did not call Rexford a monster. It did something worse. It made him look ordinary enough to investigate. I read it once, then closed my laptop. I had waited for the truth to become public, but when it finally did, I did not feel the clean victory people imagine. I felt tired, relieved, sad, like someone had opened a window in a room where I had been breathing smoke too long. Within days, the Vale family stopped moving as one. Rexford hired criminal defense counsel. Marlowe hired his own attorney after Merritt confirmed the assault, the NDA, and the footage would remain part of the intimidation record. The North Sable Consulting invoices tied to his office were no longer family embarrassment. They were evidence. Corinne's attorney contacted a trust specialist. That told me more than any public statement. When the house starts burning, polite people reach for paperwork before they reach for each other. Thayer Bexley stepped back from representing the family collectively. Board members issued careful statements. Vale Haven announced an internal review. Rexford stepped aside from foundation duties, pending further clarification. Rowan laughed when I read him that phrase. Clarification, he said. Rich people sure do have pretty words for getting caught. For the first time in weeks, I laughed too. Not much. Enough. Shannon did not call at first. She texted, "Please don't make me testify against my father." I stared at the sentence, a long time. She did not ask how I was. She did not ask what it felt like to hear Alden's voice in that hearing room. She still did not say my father's name. Even then, she was asking me to protect her from the consequences of what her family had done. That was when I knew the divorce would not be a storm. It would be a door closing. I agreed to meet her once, not at our house, not at the Vale estate, at my father's kitchen table. Alden's little house still held the quiet of him. A chipped mug near the sink, old mail stacked beside the toaster, one chair with a leg he always meant to fix. No crystal glasses, no folded white napkins, no cream envelopes, just an old cloth at the edge of the table, faded from years of use, and the notebook beside it. Shannon arrived in a gray coat. She looked smaller there. Or maybe I had stopped seeing her through the size of her family. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then she said, "I was scared." I believed her. That was the hard part. I didn't know how to choose against them, she said. I looked at Alden's notebook, then at the divorce papers on the table. That's the thing, Shannon. You did choose. You just didn't choose me, she cried quietly. I never meant to hurt you. I know, I said. But meaning to hurt someone is not the only way to break them. Her eyes moved to the notebook. I should have given you the envelope. Yes, I said. That was all. Some truths do not need decoration. I took off my wedding ring and placed it beside the notebook. The metal touched the worn cover with a small sound. One thing had promised me a family. The other had reminded me what family is supposed to protect. Shannon looked at the ring. Do you think you'll ever forgive me? I don't know, I said, but forgiveness would not make this a marriage again. After she left, the kitchen felt even quieter. I opened the notebook without looking for evidence. No dates, no transfers, no room assignments. Just my father's handwriting, leaning slightly right, heavier where he had been angry, lighter near the final pages. On the last page, beneath a half-finished note about foundation money, he had written one sentence: "Truth doesn't need a loud man." Just a stubborn one. I read it twice. All my life, people had mistaken my quiet for permission. They thought because I listened, because I measured my words, because I tried not to make scenes, I could be moved aside and thanked for being reasonable. My father knew better. I had not been loud, but I had been stubborn. And this time, stubborn had been enough. The investigations did not end overnight. Real justice moves through subpoenas, resignations, hearings, statements, and people who suddenly remember they need separate lawyers. Rexford lost his reputation first. Marlowe lost the shield of being just the son. Corinne lost the comfort of pretending manners could cover rot. Shannon lost a marriage she tried to save by hiding the truth from it. And I lost things too. A father, a wife, years spent trying to belong where I had only been tolerated. But I did not lose Alden's name. I did not lose my own. I used to think the worst thing they could do was tell me I did not belong in their family. In the end, that was the first honest thing they ever said to me. I did not belong there. I belonged to the truth my father left behind.